The moment I scrambled out of that cab, the hot pavement burning through my sneakers, I knew my whole marriage had been a carefully constructed lie. I stood there on the curb in 90-degree July heat, staring at my own car, my silver Honda Civic that I'd bought with 3 years of restaurant tips and early morning prep shifts, sitting in my mother-in-law's driveway with a big red bow on the hood. A bow, like something out of a holiday commercial. And Renata, my mother-in-law, was already walking toward it with her chin lifted, her hand outstretched, reaching for the keys my husband had just dropped into her palm. "A gift for your precious mom? That's my car," I snapped, my voice cracking on the last word as I scrambled out of the cab door before it even fully stopped. "He just parked it at your house like it's his to give away." Renata turned to look at me then, slowly, deliberately, the way she always did when she wanted me to understand exactly how little she thought of me. And then, with that defiant look I had come to know better than my own reflection, she slid the key into the ignition. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the 5 years that came before it. I was 19 when I moved to Seaview Point. It's one of those Florida coastal towns that looks like a postcard from June through August, and like a ghost town from November through March. And I loved it immediately and completely. The salt in the air, the way the restaurants along the boardwalk stayed packed until midnight, the tourists who tipped 25% because they were on vacation and felt generous. I'd been cooking since I was 14. My grandmother taught me in her tiny kitchen in Ohio, and by the time I was 20, I had a line cook position at a mid-range seafood place called the Blue Anchor, which sounds forgettable, but had the best grouper sandwich on the coast, and a kitchen crew that felt like family. I met Damon Whitfield at a staff birthday party for one of the servers, 3 weeks after I turned 20. He was 24, tall, with this easy laugh that made everyone in the room feel like they were in on the joke. He worked in property management. His family owned a handful of vacation rentals along the coast, and he had that comfortable, unhurried way of moving through the world that comes from never really having to worry about money. I was the opposite. I'd been counting every dollar since I was 17, but Damon never made me feel lesser for it, at least not at first. We dated for a year. He proposed on the beach at sunrise, which I know sounds like a cliché, but felt genuinely beautiful in the moment, the light coming off the water in long orange stripes. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I was 21. He was 25. His mother, Renata, sent me a text that said, "Congratulations," with no exclamation point, and that single flat period at the end of the word should have told me everything. We got married the following spring in a small ceremony at a rented pavilion near the marina, just close friends and family, maybe 40 people. My side of the aisle had my mom, my Aunt Cecile, and 3 co-workers from the Blue Anchor. Damon's side had Renata, his aunt, a handful of cousins, and a row of his college friends, who all looked like they'd come straight from a boat. Renata wore a white dress, not ivory, not cream, white. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I smiled and danced and felt certain I was happy. For the first 2 years, I mostly was. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a pale yellow building 4 blocks from the water. It smelled like sunscreen and somebody else's dryer sheets, and I decorated it with thrift store art and the herbs I kept on the windowsill: basil, rosemary, 2 kinds of mint. We had 2 cats, a pair of orange tabbies we'd adopted together from the county shelter, Hatch and Ember. They were brothers, about 8 months old when we got them, and they ran the apartment like small, furry landlords. Hatch slept on my feet every single night. Ember knocked things off shelves with the focused dedication of a professional. My schedule at the Blue Anchor was demanding. Dinner service 6 nights a week, with occasional lunch shifts when they needed coverage. But by the time I was 22, I'd been promoted to sous chef, which meant more responsibility and better pay. Not great pay, but better. I was making around $42,000 a year by 23, with tips on the nights I ran the pass. It wasn't wealth by any measure, but I was proud of it. I'd built that from nothing, from Ohio, from a grandmother's kitchen and a willingness to stand on my feet for 12 hours in a room that regularly hit 110 degrees. I bought the Civic when I was 23, a 2019 pre-owned, just under 30,000 miles. I put $4,000 down in cash, money I'd saved in a separate account I'd opened specifically for that purpose, and financed the rest through my credit union. The title was in my name alone: my insurance, my loan, my car. Damon drove a company truck through his family's property management business, so he never needed it. The Civic was mine in every way that mattered, legally and practically. Things with Renata were manageable in those early years, which is a very specific kind of bad. Not bad enough to force a confrontation, but bad enough to leave a low-grade tension in every family gathering. She had a habit of asking questions that weren't really questions. "Oh, you're still at that restaurant?" "Yes, Renata, I'm still at the restaurant where I've been promoted twice." "Damon mentioned you two don't have a savings account together yet." "We have separate accounts, Renata, because that's an arrangement two adults made privately. I just think it's important for a wife to be financially integrated with her husband's family." "I'm sorry, what does that even mean?" Damon always smoothed it over afterward. "She's old-fashioned," he'd say. "She means well." And for years I let him say that, because it was easier than the alternative. The cracks started showing in the 4th year, but I didn't recognize them as cracks. I thought they were just stress. Damon's family business had gone through a rough stretch. 2 of their rental properties needed major repairs after back-to-back hurricane seasons, and money was tighter for them than it had been. He started working longer hours, came home distracted, quieter. I picked up extra shifts to help with our shared expenses. We stopped doing the little things, spontaneous dinners out, weekend drives up the coast. I told myself it was temporary. Every couple goes through patches. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no idea about until a Tuesday morning in late July, the kind of humid, airless day when the whole town smells like low tide, was that Damon and his mother had been having a different kind of conversation entirely. One that involved my name on documents I had never seen. One that involved my signature on paperwork I had never signed. I found out by accident, the way you always find out the things that upend your life. I'd come home early from a split shift. The lunch service had been slow, and my manager sent 2 of us home, and I was sorting through a pile of mail that had accumulated on the counter when I found an envelope addressed to me from the Florida DMV. Inside was a notice about a title transfer, a completed title transfer, for my 2019 Honda Civic. I read it 3 times. The transfer date was 6 weeks earlier. The new registered owner was listed as Renata Whitfield. My hands had gone completely cold despite the heat. I sat down on the kitchen floor, just straight down right there between the counter and the island, and Hatch came over and pressed his head against my knee, the way he always did when something was wrong. I stared at that letter until the words stopped making individual sense. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been to the DMV. I hadn't agreed to transfer my car to anyone, least of all the woman who had spent 5 years making me feel like a guest in my own marriage. My first thought was that there had been some clerical error. I called the DMV and sat on hold for 22 minutes. When I finally got through, the woman on the other end confirmed that yes, a title transfer had been processed. Yes, there was a signature on file, and yes, she could describe what was submitted. It was a notarized form. The notary stamp was from an office in the county. The signature was mine, or something that looked enough like mine that it had passed. Someone had forged my signature and gotten it notarized, which meant someone had either forged that too or found a notary willing to stamp something they shouldn't have. I hung up the phone and sat there in the kitchen while Ember knocked a magnet off the refrigerator and Hatch continued pressing himself against my leg like he was trying to hold me together. I pulled up Damon's contact in my phone. My thumb hovered over his name for a long moment. Then I put the phone face down on the floor and thought very carefully about what I actually knew and what I was going to do about it. Because here was the thing. If I called Damon right now, in this moment, he would have time to prepare. He would have time to talk to Renata. He would have time to construct whatever story they'd already agreed on. And I had the very sudden, very cold instinct that a story had already been constructed, that I was the only person in this arrangement who didn't know the script. I picked up the letter again, looked at the date of the transfer. 6 weeks ago, Damon and I had gone to his mother's house for Sunday dinner. I remembered it clearly because Renata had made her brisket, the one thing she cooked that I genuinely loved, and she'd been unusually warm to me that evening, refilling my glass, asking about my work, laughing at something I said. I'd driven home that night thinking maybe things were finally shifting, maybe we were turning a corner. I had been sitting at her table eating her food while my car was already legally hers. The nausea hit me so fast I had to press my hand flat against the kitchen floor. I breathed through it. In through the nose, slow, the way the head chef at the Blue Anchor always said to do when the dinner rush went sideways. You don't panic in my kitchen. You breathe and you move. I breathed. I moved. I got up off the floor, put the letter in my purse, changed out of my work clothes, and called a cab. I knew where Renata lived. I knew Damon's truck would be in her driveway because Tuesday afternoons he handled maintenance checks on the properties closest to her neighborhood. What I didn't know, what I could not have prepared myself for, was pulling up to her house and seeing my silver Civic sitting there with a red bow on the hood, and Damon standing next to it with his hands in his pockets, like he'd just wrapped a birthday present, and Renata coming out her front door in a sundress, smiling in a way I had never once seen her smile at me. And that's when the cab stopped. And that's when I got out. Renata didn't start the engine. Not right away. She just sat there behind the wheel of my car, door still open, one foot on the asphalt, looking at me the way you look at a stray that wandered onto your porch. Like I was an inconvenience. Like I was the one who had done something wrong. Damon stepped toward me with his hands up, palms out, that practiced calm he always deployed when he thought I was about to make a scene. Babe, just let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like my car has a bow on it, and your mother is sitting in the driver's seat, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. Something had gone very quiet inside me, the kind of quiet that comes after a long fall. So tell me what it actually is. He glanced at Renata, just for a second, but I caught it, that small, sidelong check, the look you give someone when you need to confirm the story is still holding. The car's been having issues, he started. I was going to tell you. The car has not been having issues, I said. I drove it to work 4 days ago. The oil was changed 6 weeks ago. There is nothing wrong with that car. I reached into my purse and pulled out the DMV letter, held it up between us. But there is something wrong with this, because that is my signature on a title transfer I never signed. The color left his face in a way I had never seen before. Not embarrassment, something closer to the specific panic of a person who has just realized the exit they planned for is blocked. Renata got out of the car then. She moved unhurriedly, smoothing the front of her sundress, and when she looked at me, her expression had shifted from defiance to something more careful, more calculated. Damon needed to make a business decision, she said. The property account is short. He needed collateral. He needed collateral, I repeated, with my car, that he signed over without telling me, using my forged signature. Notarized, she said, as if that word made it better. I know it was notarized, I said. I talked to the DMV, which means someone convinced a notary to stamp a document with a signature that isn't mine. That is fraud, Renata. That is a felony. She blinked, just once. Then she pressed her lips together and looked at Damon, and in that look was the entire architecture of what they had built together, the years of quiet coordination, the careful management of what I was allowed to know, the absolute certainty that I would absorb whatever they decided and be grateful for the stability in return. I had been absorbing it for 5 years. I was done absorbing. I didn't come here alone, I said. I turned toward the cab, which had pulled a few feet forward and stopped at the curb. The driver, a heavy-set man named Curtis, who I had spent the entire ride talking to after I told him in a shaking voice where I was going and why, leaned out the window and gave me a small nod. But Curtis wasn't who I meant. My Aunt Cecile's sedan was parked 2 houses down. She had been sitting in it since before I arrived. I'd called her from the kitchen floor, after I called the DMV, because Cecile was the one person I trusted absolutely. She'd worked as a paralegal for 11 years before she retired, and when I told her what the letter said, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds, and then she said, "Don't touch anything, don't call him, and don't go there alone." She'd also, on her own initiative, called a friend of hers, a woman named Priya, who was a licensed notary investigator, one of those niche professionals who exists specifically because notary fraud is more common than people think. Priya was sitting in the passenger seat of Cecile's car. She had a folder on her lap. They both got out and walked toward us across the sun-bleached asphalt, and I watched Renata's face go through several calculations in the space of about 5 seconds. "This is my Aunt Cecile," I said, "and this is Priya. Priya has been looking into the notary stamp on my title transfer since yesterday morning." I paused. The notary whose stamp was used on my paperwork had their commission suspended 8 months ago, which means any document they stamped after that date is invalid, including mine, which also means whoever submitted that document knew, or should have known, that the stamp was no good. That moves this from a paperwork error into something considerably more serious. Damon sat down on the front step of his mother's porch. He just sat down, like his legs made the decision for him. "We can work this out privately," Renata said. Her voice was still level, but there was an edge under it now, like a crack running through stone. "There's no reason to involve. You put my name on a fraudulent document and transferred my property without my consent," I said. "You involved me. I'm just responding." Cecile stepped forward and handed Renata a copy of a letter. "That's a notice that a complaint has been filed with the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles regarding the title transfer, and a separate complaint with the state attorney's office regarding the notarization. Both were filed this morning." She said it the way she said everything, quietly, without drama, with the absolute confidence of someone who has spent a decade knowing exactly which forms to file and in which order. Renata held the letter like it was something that might bite her. "Damon." I looked at my husband, sitting on that porch step in the July heat, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not rage, not satisfaction, just an exhausted, clarifying grief. "I need you to understand that I am not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because you took something that was mine, and you didn't think I'd notice, or you didn't think I'd do anything about it. And you were wrong on both counts." He looked up at me. His eyes were red. "I was going to fix it," he said. "I just needed time to—" "Fix it how?" I asked. "By giving your mother a car she didn't earn. By deciding that my asset was available to solve your family's cash flow problem." "What was the plan, Damon? What was the actual plan?" He didn't answer. He looked at the ground between his feet. That was the answer. The title transfer was reversed within 3 weeks. Priya's documentation of the invalid notary stamp, combined with the complaint to the DHSMV, moved things faster than I'd expected. The agency had apparently been looking for additional cases tied to that particular notary, and mine gave them what they needed to close the file. My name went back on the title. My Civic came back to my parking spot at the pale yellow building, minus the bow. I filed for divorce 11 days after that afternoon in Renata's driveway. I found a family law attorney named Sonia, who operated out of a small office near the county courthouse and who had, according to 3 separate online reviews, a particular gift for cases involving financial misconduct within marriages. She was not cheap. I put the retainer on a credit card, and I did not feel guilty about it for a single second. The divorce took 7 months. Florida is a no-fault state, which meant the fraud with the car didn't factor into the dissolution itself, but Sonia made sure the court was aware of it when we discussed the division of marital assets, which included some equity we'd built together in a joint savings account and a small amount of shared personal property. What I walked away with wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, cleanly and legally mine, and there was no bow on any of it. Damon and Renata did face consequences for the title transfer. The state attorney's office ultimately declined to prosecute. They cited limited resources and the fact that the transfer had been reversed. But the notary investigation resulted in a formal finding of fraud on the part of the notary, who lost their commission permanently, and a civil finding that the document had been submitted in bad faith. That finding went into the public record. I don't know what Damon and Renata did with that information. I stopped tracking what they did. I moved out of the pale yellow apartment in November. I found a one-bedroom on the north end of town, second floor, with a window in the kitchen that faced east and caught the morning light in a way that made the whole room feel like it was breathing. I brought Hatch and Ember. They were 5 years old by then, solid, settled cats who had seen a lot, and Hatch found the sunniest corner of the new bedroom within 20 minutes and claimed it permanently. And Ember knocked a jar of dried pasta off the counter the first evening, apparently just to establish that some things don't change. I kept my job at the Blue Anchor. I kept my sous chef position, kept my Tuesday and Thursday opening shifts, kept the grouper sandwich on the menu that I'd quietly tweaked 2 years ago, and that was now, according to the Yelp reviews, the thing people drove 40 minutes for. My manager, a practical woman named Dolores, who had never once asked me about my personal life, but always seemed to know when something was wrong, gave me a small raise that November. Not a big one, but enough to matter. And she handed me the paperwork without ceremony and said, "You've been carrying this kitchen for a while. Figured it was time the paycheck said so." I cried in the walk-in cooler for about 90 seconds, and then went back to the line. Cecile came for Thanksgiving that year. We cooked together in my new kitchen, which was smaller than the old one, but felt larger somehow, the way spaces do when they're only yours. She brought sweet potato casserole and a bottle of wine that was nicer than anything I'd have bought for myself, and we sat at my second-hand table and ate until we were full and talked until we were tired. And at some point she said, without preamble, "I'm proud of you. Not for how it ended, for how you moved when it mattered." I thought about that for a long time afterward, about what it means to move when it matters, not dramatically, not with speeches, but just to get off the kitchen floor, to make the calls, to show up to the driveway with the right people and the right paperwork, and the knowledge that what was yours was yours. I still drive the Civic. It has 67,000 miles on it now, and a small crack in the rear passenger window that I keep meaning to get fixed. Every time I pull out of my parking spot and feel the steering wheel under my hands, the specific worn texture of it, the way it sits just right at 10 and 2, I think about that red bow on the hood, about how someone decided my things were available for the taking because they had decided I was. That was the part that took the longest to unknot. Not the anger, not even the grief, but the question of how I had spent 5 years in a house with someone who thought of me that way, and whether I'd missed the signs, and what it said about me that I hadn't seen it sooner. Here's what I finally landed on. I didn't miss it because I was naive. I missed it because I was busy building something real. I was working 12-hour shifts and learning to run a kitchen, and paying my own loan, and saving in my own account, and loving a person with the assumption that he was doing the same. I was present. I was whole. The failure wasn't mine. And the car, my car, with its worn steering wheel and its cracked window, and its 3 years of restaurant tips baked into the down payment, is still mine. That's not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. Some people will try to take what you built the moment they sense you might not be watching. The only answer is to keep watching, and when you find the letter in the pile of mail, to breathe, to get up off the floor, and to know exactly who to call.